I thought that Crysis Warhead would be nothing more than a footnote at the end of my year's later series on the main installment, just a small expansion pack adding a few more levels to the base game. No, Warhead is the missing link. It totally changes my perception of these games, and before the end of this video, you might come to understand why. Crysis Warhead came out 1 year after Crysis. It was sold as an expansion pack at half the price of the first, yet it was about 2/3 as long and in my eyes improves upon the first in almost every way. Most notably in terms of performance. Well, at least according to Crytek. Not only was Warhead supposed to look better than 1, it was also supposed to run better, appealing once again to the graphics-hungry PC gamers and those who just couldn't get the game working in 2007. This was an important move for Crytek. Everyone was blown away by Crysis the year before, but that was either because it looked so cool or because their PC fans were spinning fast enough to achieve vertical takeoff. They needed to widen their audience if they wanted to appease their dark overlords. So, how did they do? They certainly came through as far as graphics goes. Warhead is significantly more pretty than the first game, with much more impressive set design and art, better lighting, and impressive ice effects that freeze over your scopes and allow you to shatter frozen physics objects. Even 9 years later, this game is one of the best looking shooters I've ever seen. It's truly jaw-dropping. In terms of performance though, opinion was mixed. According to IGN, Warhead ran better, but not everyone agreed, citing that there was no significant improvement whatsoever. I imagine optimizing graphics technology that no one had even heard of before was a challenge, but it was what Crytek needed to do, and from the system requirements alone, you can tell that they just couldn't pull it off. Some reviewers labeled the PC specs needed to run the game as unacceptable, going on to inform customers that you would still need a top-of-the-line graphics card if you wanted to play at stable frame rates. But can it run Crysis for many had gone from a meme to an annoyance. Perhaps that's why so many forgot this game ever even existed. I'm going to explain why that's a tragedy. Crysis Warhead did everything an expansion pack should have. It looked at the previous game and it systematically fixed almost every single one of its major flaws. The horror and mystery being dropped 1 hour into the game for no reason at all? Fixed. They never drop it and keep it strong to the end. The protagonist being flat and given no development or personality to bond to? Not this time. The total lack of wide open levels filled with tactical opportunities in the latter half of the game? Fixed. The final mission itself opens with one of the largest base fights the game has ever seen, and it's big and dense enough to facilitate almost every approach. The jarring shift in gameplay from tactical shooter to action blockbuster? Fixed. There are no more levels that are only one or the other. Every single mission in the game has a mix of wide, tactical sandboxes and high-octane set pieces. The transition between these two gameplay styles is smooth and natural. The action sequences being largely rubbish. Fixed. You get to have a firefight across moving trains. I think the one thing people wanted, including myself after Crysis 1, was for Crytek to abandon their Call of Duty-fication of the great combat sandbox they had wowed everyone with. Stop making stupid but pretty turret sections and get working on those giant environments that allow me to complete my objective however I please. Crytek said no. They said screw that, we'll prove we can do both. The first and most obvious example of all being the protagonist, Psycho. Remember when Psycho got contacted by a mysterious official halfway through the first game? Remember how you meet back up with him on the USS Constitution and he tells you that you would never believe what he saw? Well, in this game we get to see it. It's one thing to write an interesting, charismatic, likable protagonist with a strong personality, it's another thing entirely to build your whole game around it. According to Crytek, the plot and dialogue was built around Psycho himself. They took his personality and thought about how they'd make a game to fit him. More action, more badassery, more explosions, and what that meant for the player was a much higher pace. That seems to conflict with the tactical nature of Crysis' best gameplay though. No. Crysis Warhead is far smaller than the first game, yet when it does do tactics, it does it just as well. This is because Crysis had a whole lot of not much in its levels. There was a lot of totally depopulated land that had no significance whatsoever. It didn't hurt the game, it made it feel more real if anything since the scale was so much more palpable. In Warhead, almost every square meter of land has a reason to exist. It's as if the designers systematically cut out every section of terrain that didn't contribute anything. And the result of this is density, and therefore a naturally higher pace at no sacrifice of pacing, complexity, or tactical opportunities. Level design is the blood of a tactical shooter for both its gameplay and its story, so let's dissect some of the best missions Warhead has on offer. That won't be a hard task, because Warhead gets you straight into the action when you start the game. Your VTOL immediately crashes and you're immersed into a huge-scale conflict between the KPA and the US military. The game tutorializes its combat and gives you various small-scale arenas, all while showing crashing jets, airstrikes, and burnt settlements. The game opens up very quickly, giving you your first secondary objectives. These have no in-game effects, but that's because they're here to tutorialize the system. You're heavily funneled into the first one, but the second one is right off the beaten track. It's very clear just how much Crytek learned from developing the first game's early levels. Instead of having you walk down a road and occasionally put you on a section of beach or forest, the beach, water, and road are far more intertwined with differing elevations. It manages to introduce the tactical element of the game into the traversal itself. You can easily go down the road, but you'll be lit up like a Christmas tree by the KPA. It's a tad more tricky to drive on the beach, but you'll have much better luck avoiding the Koreans. And the water will either require you to ditch your vehicle entirely or risk driving it straight off a waterfall, but to the benefit of shaking or avoiding the KPA. The main attraction of the level, though, is the final encampment at the beach resort. It's a very creative idea for a base, but your objective is even more so. You've got to take out all of the enemy armor rather than the usual get to a terminal and download some data. There's also a helicopter and a horde of KPA in the resort, so to stay alive you need to progress through the beach huts, slowly clearing the KPA and keeping one eye on the tank so it can't get a clear shot. The tank isn't accurate enough that you're dead if it sees you, but if you dare to stop moving in its sight, it's game over. The best way to take it out is with the missile launcher that's hidden in the center of the far beach bar. You get it marked for you as a secondary, but it isn't really a secondary either, since you pretty much need to get it. Surprisingly, stealth isn't actually impossible here. It's very easy to sneak up to the exposed cars and light the gunner and drivers up before they can return fire, and you can take out the tank in less than 5 seconds with 2 successive missile shots. Crytek immediately proved that they can design one of the biggest and most liberating bases we've ever seen while having your objective be to simply blow things up. But Shore Leave does it even better, ending with what is, in my opinion, the best base Crysis has ever seen. It starts with a huge car chase protecting Sean O'Neill, a downed pilot. Your car has a set health bar, and of course there's save checkpoints, so you can get yourself into a really awful position simply because the game saves you at 80% damage. The real challenge of this part is trading evasive maneuvers with offense from your turret. You can only be in one at a time, so when you're shooting back you'll have to let the car roll. If you end up with a destroyed car, you either need to hijack another, which isn't impossible but practically suicide nonetheless, or walk it. Run it, rather, with maximum speed. Still, even here you'll be getting turned into the first human pencil since there's so little cover. O'Neill doesn't even seem capable of dying, so in reality the best strategy is to just dodge as much damage as you can and get to the finish. A cool idea on paper, but it really could have used a bit more development time, which is also echoed by the second driving section in the game, though it's not the polish there that fails, it's the fact that you've got no direction whatsoever. Thankfully, soon after you finish the escort section, you've got a long drive over to the beach, during which you'll be attacked by a helicopter and come by multiple roadblocks. You can get to the harbour by stealing a car and driving off the waterfall, which you'll need to bail out of if you want to live, or by driving around the roadblock. This will exit you at the front of the harbour base, whereas the waterfall will take you down the side. Obviously, the base is hugely fortified, but you can actually assault the front pretty comfortably with the help of O'Neill and the VTOL. Stealth is facilitated by the ladders leading onto the piers, which you can swim to. There's a small army of snipers, a weak APC, and hordes of basic KPA to contend with as you dive between the cover provided by the shipping containers, walls, and sandbags. There's a secondary in which you can get a grenade launcher to balance the power against the APC, and you can also sneak past the snipers using the water and surprise them from behind. There's more options in this base than ever before, and the pace is kept high with the density and VTOL fire support, a feat only amplified by the objective design. The first marker is right in the heart of the base, making it hard to avoid much of the KPA. Then you're directed over to the submarine at the end of the pier. So you get to see and fight through almost every area of the base rather than just parts of it like the harbour base in the last game. There, you just had to get to the ship. You could entirely skip the far half of the base. Warhead makes Crysis 1's harbour base look like it was developed by children. Much like that game, Crysis Warhead focuses more on the action rather than the combat sandbox in the later parts of the game. But unlike Crysis, it doesn't for a second sacrifice its tactical nature. I think the previously hyped train mission explains this best. You start off moving up to the few Korean guards on guns ahead. You're in a good range to kill them just as you start passing by enemy vehicles and emplacements by the track, so you've got to kill the soldiers, run up to the gun, or duck into cover immediately lest you be torn to shreds thanks to your tiny health bar. There's just enough cover for you to survive the gunfire, and I mean just. You can barely keep yourself alive by ducking between these tiny gaps on certain train cars, constantly debating the merits of using maximum armor to extend your life, maximum strength to jump a gap, or maximum speed to escape a bad spot and reposition. Thinking about exactly when to make a move is paramount, since you need to expose yourself to get on the mounted guns, which is basically the only way of dispatching the pursuing helicopter. This is the perfect microcosm of Warhead's design. They create a blood-pumping action set piece, but manage to keep the gameplay firmly tactical by constantly providing you with a wide array of options to survive and fight back. The train soon stops at a station. You get off and immediately have to fight through a KPA base with O'Neill. The cover is dense and the pace is never sacrificed thanks to O'Neill's fire support. Once again, you get both experiences in the same level. After the train gets going again, you jump back on, but now you've got to worry about enemy trains as well as mounted gunners, cars, and another helicopter. The odds seem to be tipped in the enemy's favor, but you're actually able to jump onto enemy trains and off your own to reposition or to take out enemy gunners. Both an incredibly empowering experience, but also a totally new combat sandbox. The set piece is only made better by the swamp setting, which is surrounded by giant trees and fauna, making for one of the most beautiful segments the game has ever seen. It's appropriate then that the train mysteriously stops in the middle of the swamp, and you hear strange noises coming from the container in the car ahead. This was your mission, to stop the KPA from getting that container at all costs. It was believed to be some kind of warhead, but it became clear it was of Ceph design, and now it's communicating with them. You can hear noises coming from all around you, rocks crumble ahead, the ground shakes, and the Ceph ambush. This is a technique the game uses on multiple occasions, to plant a seed of worry in your head and use it to create tension and suspense. The game that's supposedly all about the action actually manages to do mystery and horror infinitely better than its predecessor, the most notable of which is in one of the two levels in the Ceph Snowdome. You infiltrate a carrier frozen still in the ice, which by the way is an incredible idea for a level. There's a bunch of nano soldiers you have to fight through both outside the ship and in. The nano soldiers are the only people who can survive the sub-zero temperatures, so when you do fight the Koreans here, it's all them. The music as well as the creaking ship create the tensest atmosphere the game has ever seen. Random ship explosions, objects suddenly rolling towards you. But the time Crytek really impressed me was this. There's frozen soldiers all over the place so you can shatter if you're feeling sadistic. Later in the level, you drop down into the ship's canteen. There's a few frozen nano soldiers, right? You walk by them and all of a sudden they turn around and attack. Yeah, they were pretending to be frozen to trick you into coming towards them. Now, I'm not 100% certain this was intentional because the soldier can be seen moving slightly if you pay attention, but that's the effect it has, and I'd like to assume that Crytek knew what they were doing. You can of course figure out that they shouldn't be frozen since the nanosuits protect the wearer from the snowdome. Yeah, the Ceph aren't the only ones Crytek are able to work their tension building magic on. Later on in that same mission, you see a Ceph exosuit shooting up a Korean APC that's been backed onto the edge of a cliff. So you run away down this ravine. There's a bunch of infantry Ceph for you to fight, and you can hear the exosuit stomp up above. It never does come down, but you can't know that on your first time through. You come out of the ravine to a huge gated base where you can see the Ceph picking up heavy lifting machines. This makes the Ceph seem more alien, as if they're experimenting and learning. To actually see the Ceph interacting with the levels as if they're a real alien force and not just flying around being bullet receptacles is a sorely needed improvement over the first game. But the Ceph's portrayal isn't the only thing Crytek improved for Warhead. Their AI has also been totally revamped, most notably with the flying things. The game literally never names them, so let's just stick with Spooky Boys. They've now got two AI subsets, highly durable non-combative troop transports and the improved combat units. Their movement has gone from hopelessly circle to something that seems a lot more fluid and alien. They shoot you with damaging laser attacks and use the freeze beam a hell of a lot less often, which is a mercy. It takes about 5 gore shots to kill them rather than 2, and even more when you encounter the red combat unit who can also drop off bombs. It's a shame that you only ever get to fight the red Spooky Boy once though, for the rest you'll be fighting the classic blue ones. While their health seems to have massively increased, it's all in tune with the game's action focus, since every time you encounter them you'll be showered in heavy weaponry or with AI teammates. It's good because it also makes them seem a lot more powerful when they can't be downed in a mere 2 shots. Unfortunately, the transport units take this too far. You can put 7 Gorse into them and not get a kill, which means even if they're not invincible, they're practically unkillable. It's an annoying restriction when you consider how much ammo you waste assuming they'll eventually go down, though this was more than likely so they would always be able to drop off the mini Ceph infantry guys that they hold in their claws. There's a new Ceph infantry unit who glows green and can shield other Ceph in the area, meaning you have to target the shield giver first. This is now a common convention in enemy design. I still don't think it's very clever. All it asks the player to do is to move their cursor over to a different enemy. once. That's not exactly depth, nor is it exciting gameplay. It even has the potential to be quite frustrating when your shots do nothing because of some shieldy arsehat. If it encouraged the player to move into a different position to take a shot at the protector, we'd be talking. Warframe does this, kinda, so does Halo 3 and Titanfall 2. But here, it just encourages the movement of your mouse slightly to the right or left. Having these green units grant a Reinhardt-type shield that only covers a certain area would encourage the player to appropriately reposition, throw grenades, or even look to environmental objects to blow up. Some Ceph enemies actually do encourage rapid repositioning though, and those are the exosuits. Crysis Warhead's first boss fight follows the same formula as the one we got in the last game, just without as much spectacle. There's a big scary bullet sponge with a variety of ranged attacks and one move to prevent the player getting too close. In this case, it's a grab. There's a huge amount of cover surrounding said big scary bullet sponge. This cover will hold all sorts of ordnance for you to deal damage with. You go to the cover, pick up the weaponry, shoot the boss until he shifts his focus to you, then either hide or run to the next piece of cover. You effectively rotate around the arena. There'll also be enemy ads to give you other things to shoot at. This formula is logical for a game that gives the player such a tiny health bar, meaning they can't expose themselves for very long. It also makes the Ceph seem as powerful and overbearing as they should, and it's usually very entertaining given the variety of heavy weapons the arena will give you to play with. So the formula is basically perfect for Crysis, which is why it's been repeated in literally every single boss encounter the series has had since, except for one. The final boss, who you'll encounter at the end of one of the greatest levels the series has ever seen. Warhead was where Crysis died for many a player, with Crysis 2 taking the game in an unexpected direction. The final level of Warhead was the last time we would ever get to see the original design. So I'm very happy we ended on a high note. It's effectively one giant base. If the amount of explosions and sheer spectacle of everything going on around you doesn't blow you away, the scale will. The level starts out as a classic base encounter. There's lots of cover, munitions hidden everywhere, sniper posts, shotguns, every option available and facilitated. You progress through hearing battles on your radio, which only amplifies that feeling of conflict. The next section is something that's only ever done here. It's a massive runway. The game will make that perfectly clear when it has a cargo plane take your hat off. Your objective is to get to the end where you'll need to assault yet another base, but that'll be harder than you might think, what with the small battalion of tanks and machine guns ready to stop you. If you rush the objective, you'll be torn to shreds, so you're going to need to dip into the small offshoots to get a new car or load up with missile launchers, anti-tank mines and gorse. This cannot be done slowly. It's practically impossible to stay out of the tank's line of sight, so you need to dive out of your car, grab weapons, fire shots, and jump in a new vehicle in a matter of seconds. The intensity is palpable. I found the most reliable strategy was to rush an unpiloted tank, dive out of my own car, and immediately fire everything I had at the enemy armor, which would clear a path to the crash plane and past it to the final encampment, which is where the first of the few problems with this level lies. I don't like how open the airfield is when you're attacking the final base. Since there's so many enemies and unless you walk to it, you're going to be driving a car, when you're detected, you're going to need to fight the entire base's inhabitants from one piece of cover. The field is too big to go across because your speed and cloak will only get you about half the way. You're effectively trapped in a single position for far too long. There needed to be more cover around the entrance so you could slowly progress into the base. If you do manage to get in without being trapped, the final arena is incredible. There'll be an army of KPA lining the base with RPGs and gorse, but you'll be just as well equipped thanks to the ammo caches in the first section and all the missile launchers on the runway. All the tanks outside will still likely be alive, so you're going to be under constant bombardment, and thanks to their accuracy, that serves to keep you moving more than it does to punish you. Once you make it up to the control tower, the atmosphere darkens and the Ceph attack by the 1,000, headed up by a mothership. Basically, you're Donald Ducked. The Koreans make one last stand against the aliens, and it's all-out war. You've got to navigate your way through the crossfire to the crash plane and pick up some kind of experimental weapon. The Ceph seem to overwhelm the Koreans very quickly here, which means you'll mostly have to fight them. But once you do get the packs, it's a one-shot kill over to the final boss. The game tries to act like getting the packs is a secondary, but it isn't. I don't even think it's possible to beat the final boss without it, which, by the way, is another giant exosuit, but red this time. And also free, meaning it can go wherever it pleases. It's so big that it can traverse the environment with ease, and that gives it an incredible sense of scale. There's nothing like the exosuit simply loom over you with your back against the wall. If it does get close enough, it'll pick you up with its tentacle things, which seems very scary, but it gives a perfect shot on his mouth. And if you do enough damage, he'll let you go. Sometimes he'll just leave you and you'll have to chase him across the airfield with no cover, leading to your inevitable death. He's also got a huge explosion once he's been killed, which will very easily take you with him and put you back before the fight even started. Seriously? You beat the boss of the game, but if you aren't far enough back, you have to do it again? Maximum speed doesn't really help here. If he dies near you, you lose. I have to question if this was even playtested. Thankfully, those are where the problems with this boss ends, leaving us with the most impressive final encounter the series has ever seen by simply allowing it to move outside of a tiny arena. Part of the reason I'm so happy that Warhead's final boss was at least good is because for many people, the series ended here. And while my opinion is out on Crysis 2 and 3, the ending to Crysis 3 was one of the most disappointing and saddening experiences I ever had in my time playing video games. I'll never dismiss those games, but I feel I too have to accept Warhead as my ending. It was strong in both gameplay and in story, which is what I'm going to cover next. We've looked at all the action and fast-paced battles, but I haven't mentioned your motivation for doing it. The game is named after this box. Your mission is to get it back from Colonel Lee, a KPA nano soldier who'd rather wear golden aviators than his protective mask in the middle of a war zone. Admittedly, it does make him infinitely more recognizable than General Kyong, so I'll let it fly. That box is supposedly carrying nuclear warheads that are being taken off the island and shipped over to Pyongyang to be loaded and fired at the US forces. A fairly strong motivator, since of course you want to save yourself and the rest of Raptor Team, except for the fact that this game is set before the ending of Crysis 1, which means anyone who played that first will already know nothing comes of it. It then gets even weaker when Lee's got you captive and it's implied that the container's contents aren't warheads but instead Ceph technology. So what's your motive for going after the box now? Because the scary lady on the radio told you to? Really? It's actually only in the final cutscene that they give the box any context at all. Apparently, it contains a Ceph that didn't self-destruct on death, so Lee wants to take it back to Korea for reverse engineering. Still pretty weak, but if told to the player before the game was over, it might have helped the situation at least somewhat. Thankfully, a weak motivator isn't so big a deal given how well the level design and dialogue keep your head in the game. The four main characters are Psycho, O'Neill, Emerson, and Lee. Emerson is the commander of the operation who you talk to over the radio, and O'Neill is some guy. He gets a lot of development throughout the game, going from despising having to work with Raptor Team to putting his life on the line to save you as you do his earlier in the game. Apparently, O'Neill was going to be Nomad, but he screwed up in training and got someone killed. He's still salty about that years after, and at the start of the game he's a total arse about being your pilot. Why? I get that it might have been very uncomfortable, but O'Neill says that he should have had Nomad's position. Wasn't he the one that made a critical error? After the first mission, O'Neill gets beaten in a dogfight and crash lands in the middle of a forest. Emerson urges Psycho to stay on the container, but Psycho argues that he can also save O'Neill, who's being surrounded by KPA. This is more important for Psycho than it is for O'Neill, because it's shown he's willing to disobey direct orders to save lives, making him an instantly likable protagonist. He goes on to stop O'Neill from executing a beaten KPA soldier, saying that there are some rules he does follow. Psycho is made out to be an infinitely more respectable and likable person compared to his portrayal in the first game, but his anger comes through when needed as well, like his outburst at Colonel Lee for torturing him and his reaction to not being able to save a fallen Marine. At the end of the train chase, Lee ambushes you. He's got a Marine hostage who he throws out of the helicopter. Psycho saves him in a really poorly directed jump, but drops the explosive detonator, which could stop Lee from getting the container. An enemy nano soldier goes for it, but Psycho would have to drop the Marine to stop him. Why he can't just use maximum strength here, I don't know. He drops the Marine, promising that he'll live, and then drags the enemy soldier over the bridge, pushing the button in midair. When he wakes up, Psycho tries to save the Marine but fails. The Korean survived. Psycho's pretty pissed. He walks over to him as the Korean desperately shoots to no avail. Just aim for his unprotected head. Why Psycho continually refuses to just put on a mask confuses me. He then drowns the Korean and sits on a rock for about a minute. Yeah, Crytek haven't quite got how to direct a cutscene yet. It seriously drags on. In writing, it's a mature enough portrayal of Psycho's anger, but in practice you spend what feels like a century awkwardly staring at Psycho's mug. But by far the most questionable of these cutscenes is the final one. After the final boss goes down, Lee ambushes you. Everything's good until Psycho and Lee fight on board the VTOL. This fight makes Halo 5's Master Chief duel look like John Wick. It's hilarious. I don't know if I'd rather have another awful 1v1 boss fight with Lee or that cutscene, to be honest. Though admittedly, leaving him to the Ceph was a cool way to end it, and Psycho also delivers the best line in the entire series by a mile.
I'm British, you muppet!
Which is actually a callback to a previous scene.
Yankee 새끼들! I'm British, you muppet! Muppet? Idiot.
Sean Chapman does the voice for Psycho, and it's such a good performance that I think it was one of the biggest reasons Psycho was so much better a protagonist than Nomad. I'm glad David Kennedy honoured Chapman's excellence in Crysis 3. And as for story, that's all there is to it. For a short game like Warhead, all a story needed to have was a strong villain to help give a sense of urgency and a few characters to develop and get attached to. Unfortunately, Warhead's villain was a boring, totally flat KPA arsehole whose plan involved moving a box filled with unexplained alien junk. Its setting in time betrayed it, since the vast majority of people who played Warhead will have played Crysis first. O'Neill had no reason to be there for the vast majority of the plot, and his backstory was played up as really important information, but it means literally nothing at all for anything apart from a fan theory. He was irrelevant. Psycho was an excellently performed and written protagonist, but the poor direction of scenes hurts his character as much as they reinforce it. Though admittedly, the portrayal of the aliens was far smarter than the first game. Warhead does not have a bad story despite the major problems I listed. It was still engaging enough throughout the majority of the game. I just wish a bit more thought had gone into it, because this game could have been damn near perfect if it had a great story to back up its gameplay. I said at the beginning of this video that Warhead was the missing link, and now I'm going to explain why. Crysis Warhead was everything Crysis 2 should have been. The excuse given for bringing the series to console and linearizing it was in the name of a more fast-paced, intense FPS experience. Warhead is one of the most fast-paced, intense FPS games I've ever played, yet it almost never sacrificed its tactical openness. Crysis 2 did. It's constantly dismissed as a crappy COD clone that didn't have a tactical bone in its body, and I explained in Crysis 2 6 years later that I didn't at all agree. Crysis 2 is still Crysis, even if it is linearized and even if it did reductively streamline the combat sandbox. Thing is, it didn't have to. Warhead proved Crytek could provide everything Crysis 2 was supposedly made to do, while not only keeping the freedom of Crysis 1, but in many parts making it even better. Denser level design, improved terrain, better AI. Though Warhead's story was mediocre and Crysis 2 had a far more engaging plot, that's down in part to Warhead being a naturally shorter game and to having a far more experienced writer. The linearization was in no way necessary to tell Robert Morgan's new story or to introduce Alcatraz. Everything that happened in New York could have happened anywhere. It's sad that Crytek felt the need to linearize even after they themselves developed the game that proved they didn't have to. But numbers speak the loudest. Warhead was not only a simple expansion but also ran on the same engine that locked Crysis 1 to only the most dedicated PC gamers. Warhead would never generate the sales needed to convince either Crytek or EA that focusing on console might not have been the way to go. Crysis 2 was in development at the exact same time Warhead was. Perhaps if Warhead had managed to pull through on its performance promises, it would have been early enough to course correct on Crysis 2. Perhaps if Crysis 1 hadn't been as restricted as it was, Warhead wouldn't have had to. Now in 2017, Crysis is dead and buried. It'll likely never return. But after making this video, I'm no longer defeated by that, because I believe the series did achieve its greatness with Crysis Warhead. Thank you for watching this video, and if you followed the order of release, thank you for sticking with the series. If you're following the order of the games, I already have videos on Crysis 2 and 3. A video on Crysis Wars is unlikely thanks to GameSpy's closure, but not impossible. As my channel grows, I hope to cover the Fear, Stalker, Assassin's Creed, Spider-Man, and Darksiders games, but I'm also looking at Zelda, Watch Dogs 2, Dragon Age, Shadow of War, Ghost Recon, Prototype, and Rocket League. And with that, it's time to end. Until next time.